just go, if you wouldn't mind just expanding that, that's great. Can everyone see that? That's great. So good morning, everyone. Really nice to see so many of you on the call, and thanks for joining this session. For those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet this morning, my name's Amrit Ali, and I'm Associate Director for Performance. And in this session, I'm going to go through, as Catherine was saying, a small case study to introduce you briefly to some simple demand and capacity tools and templates that we've developed. And really, the aim of this is to make it easy for teams to apply the theory and get a deeper understanding and insight into the challenges that they're facing, so that they can build a coherent plan and forecast where they hope to be in the future, which will ultimately mean delivering better experiences, both service users and staff. And what we're going to show you, over 45 teams, I believe, have started to use these templates across the trust. But don't worry if you can't fully digest all of it at this stage. It's really to give you a flavour of what's available for you to draw on in this journey. And you can always reach out to me and the performance team where you need additional support as we go. Next slide, please, go, Paul. So this is a summary of one of the recovery templates that we've created, really, and this helps teams it walks teams through a series of steps and exercises, really, to formulate their plans. And there's a huge temptation just to get on and do things as a team, but what this structure and format and this process asks teams to consider is exploring a number of core tasks using some tools some of the tools that Nicholas has presented earlier, to really get beneath the issues before considering possible solutions, really. And so what we're going to do is look at the Bedfordshire Wellbeing Service case study to see how they've utilised this tool and the process that they've gone through. So they started, again, similar to what's been advised, really, to pull together a team. Sorry, go for the next slide. So what they did is they got a project team together of a number of staff groups to look at their pathway and plot the journey of an experience of service users through that pathway. And this is quite a simple one, so it's not very complicated to do, but it was good to get the team together. And what they found was that the real challenge that they wanted to focus on was a particular bottleneck around their CBT pathway, the one-to-one referrals. There were other issues as well that they identified, but this was the main one that they wanted to focus on initially. Next slide, please, go, Paul. And then from that, what they did is started to look at their data. So looking at their demand initially, to look at the fluctuations across the referrals to the service as a whole, but also the one below is actually the referral patterns to the CBT pathway itself, to sort of understand if there's any sort of seasonal variations, any sort of weekly variations. And again, Tom's highlighted the dashboards where you can hopefully look at some of this data in more detail within your services. And what you can see actually is, for the CBT bit of the pathway, actually over time, the number of referrals had started to decrease from sort of highs of 60s right down to sort of around 30, 33. And that's partly because of the plan that they put in place and the initiatives that they started, which we'll talk about shortly. Next slide, please, Gopal. So from understanding their demand and the fluctuations, they looked at their capacity. And this is quite a really difficult, for some teams they find it quite difficult, but it's quite an important part, as we discussed earlier, to really know the type of challenge that your team is facing, and the scale of the challenge really that your team is facing. So is the demand and capacity simply about demand outstripping capacity, or is it more nuanced than that within your services? Could it be that demand and capacity is sufficient, but it's not aligned, i.e. your teams might find that they've got enough capacity, but it's just not available in the right way to manage the peaks and troughs, for example. Some of the services that have done this exercise, they've discovered that there's significant variations within their pathways, particularly with professional groups. So some staffing groups have a variety of different case loads, sizes, case mixes, number of assessments and treatment slots that they can offer, or length of times that they're able to offer those appointments. And these variations can really impact on your capacity and also create queues along the pathway. And so what they've done is to answer that question about what the nature of their capacity gap is, they looked at initially their funded capacity, so what they're actually established for, and from that, how much referrals that they could see in a particular week by each staff member, which is, so each referral they identified would require at least 10 sessions on average. And based on that and the whole time equivalence, it meant that they could actually see around 47 referrals per week. So that was their establishment. But then there's the reality. What are they actually doing at the moment based on the reality on the ground, which is the actual staffing levels? And so they looked at the actual, and you can see based on a similar logic that they're not fully staffed. They've got a lot of short vacancies within the services. So they can actually only see 33 referrals per week, which is actually consistent with their number of demand that they established, which is about, on average, about 33 referrals coming in. But there's clearly a gap within the service in terms of their actual established capacity. But also, if they're at equilibrium between their capacity and their demands, it means that they maintain the status quo, i.e. the backlog and the bottlenecks continue to happen. So they actually need to create more capacity in order to reduce their waiting list. But actually, now they've done this exercise, they've got a better idea of actually how far away they are as a team to resolve some of those challenges that they've identified with that particular bit of the pathway. And the tip here really is to try and do your capacity by looking and breaking down your pathways that you're really interested in. So if you've got one particular pathway, we'd advise you to just look at your capacity for that bit of the pathway. And if you've got another issue with another bit of the pathway, do this exercise again for that bit of the pathway, because then you'll really be able to understand your gaps within each part of the pathway itself and really tweak your plans accordingly. And if you can't get your data on capacity, consider just doing a 1 week audit or a monthly audit instead of a typical week of assessments within your teams within that pathway, if it's too difficult to get into getting that data. And having gathered that information, next slide, please go, Paul. Having gathered that information, they were in a position now to fill in the activity tool here, forecasting tool. And really, they populated that information with the exercise that they carried out before. So they've been able to gather their demand data on their demand, gather data on their capacity, and also then they were able to look at the actual activity that they were pushing through their pathway and measure the actual waiting list as a starting point, and also forecasting where they hope they would be as according to what they predicted, and that automatically populates a trajectory for you within that service. So it's all inbuilt within this template. It populates based on those assumptions where you will be with your caseload, and where you hope to be, plan versus reality, really, which is what's plotted there, where they hope to be and what actual caseload was and their constant capacity. And that capacity will change based on initiatives that you may come up with, like ad hoc capacity outsourcing. So in this service, they've done quite a number of initiatives to increase their capacity. And just note that this may need to be adapted to different services, which it can be, and please do reach out to us if you need that. So for inpatient services, we can adapt the template to look at different components from a different perspective, such as occupied bed days, or reducing the average length of stay, or reducing the delayed detox days on a particular ward, for example, what that would do to your capacity. So there's ways to adapt this to different teams. And so having done that, they've, sorry, next slide, please go, Paul. Having done that, they've came up with a plan, and also there's some lessons that they learned along the way. So these are the main ideas at the top that the teams explored. So things like outsourcing, as I mentioned, using the underspend to think creatively with that underspend about how they could use a subcontractor for parts of the pathway, and that increased capacity. They also had different staff members training for new trainees in the pipeline, and also they looked at different treatment options. So having group offer meant that there was less pressure going into the one-to-one CBT, which was a real bonus, and also looked at sort of having different courses of shorter durations, really. And the key lessons from all of this are just highlighted here, but just to say that things change all the time. So you may come up with a plan, but there'll be unexpected challenges that come along the journey, and that's fine. And this tool is there to be a live tool, so you can iterate it as you go and model what's going on in reality for you using this template. But they also learned that they found creative ways to use funding. They found creative ways to come up with ideas for increasing capacity with the same resource, so recruitments and shorter courses. And also, most importantly, by doing this and having a plan which they could reference and see what was going on in reality, was really beneficial for the team to learn and improve their approach to tackling the challenges that they wanted to address as a team.
Wonderful, Amrit. Is there any more